Good evening and welcome to episode 405 of the Gersnet Podcast. I'm John McCallum, I'm your host tonight. I'll be joined by Colin Armstrong on your Friday preview show ahead of Sunday's match against Celtic. Gersnet is not just, of course, a podcast. We have, we have a forum, we have articles, we have social media, we have a history archive. This is the podcast that is made by fans for fans, where the content is free, and we would encourage you to subscribe and share on social media if you can. Now, looking ahead, we'll have a chat about Sunday's game and try and monitor our thoughts on that. We will have a chat about takeovers, maybe directors of football, possible Dundee fullbacks joining us, and if we get a chance, we maybe even think back to some happier old firm matches at Ibrox. Now, before we do any of that, though, I have to mention our sponsors, who are Forrest Precision Engineering. They are a Glasgow subcontract-based engineering company, and they've been a big commercial supporter of Rangers for many years, and we are delighted that they've been backing our podcast again this season. You can find out more about them by visiting forrestprecisioneng.com. You can also find out more about the Forrest Precision Executive Lounge, a hospitality area within the main stand, which is available for hire. There's not many games left this season, but it is available. So if you would like to know how to book that space, contact the club directly on hospitality@rangers.co.uk. Now, as is a Friday night show, there's just the two of us tonight, it's myself and Colin. Frankie moved both of us from Sunday, from the flagship Sunday night show to the half-hour Friday preview, and I can't help but feel that he thought exposing the Rangers support to 60 minutes of us instead of 30 was maybe just fairer. They've suffered enough this season, Colin, don't you think?
Yeah, it's been a long, hard season, and as I said to you earlier on, I'd rather deal with the hope than the reality in these games. You know what I mean? I've sat on a Sunday night far too many times dealing with the usual scenario. So yeah, let's deal with what we hope we can do rather than what might happen.
Well, let's deal with hope then. Let's go in with a positive attitude, Colin. You know, you and I are known as the Chuckle Brothers of Gersnet, the happy and gay and cheerful lads. That's the names they call us, Colin, isn't it? Well, some of them anyway.
Yeah. We're not two middle-aged Presbyterians at all, John.
No, we're not dour. We're not down. Our glass is most definitely not half empty, Colin, is it? And we haven't seen it all before, and we're just now jaded by it all. That's not true. That's not who we are. Looking ahead to Sunday, Barry Ferguson said this isn't a dead rubber, is it?
Well, it is really, isn't it? You know, I mean, the leagues. I mean, I think if any team rocks up in the final Old Firm game of the season and they're already champions, then there's nothing really much at stake. So in that respect, yeah, it is, but it's an Old Firm game, isn't it? Oh, sorry, a Glasgow derby. So these games always matter in that respect. You know, if it was a dead rubber, you know, that shower that's going to be back in the corner, or you know, they wouldn't be scrambling for tickets and all the rest of it. They wouldn't want to be there, but they do want to be there. So yeah, I mean, in all intents and purposes, there's nothing much at stake, but local pride in these things is always a big thing, John. So yeah, we'll go there and see what we can do.
Okay, so no dead rubber. Celtic come as champions. You mentioned they're going to have, I suspect, a vocal support in Ibrox for the first time for a few seasons. I think they have a point to prove after the last two matches, which of course Rangers have won, and of course losing the Glasgow Cup during the week to our good selves. I think they do have something to prove in this match. I think Celtic probably, their pride has taken a bit of a dent, particularly the game at Parkhead, which I think we deserved to win. It was a closer game, but we deserved to win. I don't think Barry Ferguson's getting the job full time. So does this match define Ferguson's legacy as the Rangers manager? You know, is that how he'll be viewing it? Is that what he'll be getting across to the players? Where will it sit for him?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a Rangers manager taking a Rangers team and against a game against Celtic. So it kind of takes care of itself in that respect. In terms of his legacy, I mean, can an interim really have a legacy? I mean, I don't look at like say Jimmy Nicholl or Ian Durrant and these people and look at their legacy as the interim Rangers managers. But I suppose for Barry, there's a little bit of difference given the fact that he obviously grew up supporting the club. His brother played for the club, and he captained the club and was really successful at Rangers. He's a Rangers man and all that kind of thing. I mean, I maybe look at this a bit simpler than everybody else. And it's because of my affection for Barry Ferguson that I'm glad he got the job. Okay, I didn't expect a huge amount from him in terms of results and stuff like that. I think it's, in terms of the home results, it's probably played out worse than I expected. But I didn't think we would see a huge improvement in terms of the overall play and stuff like that, because I just think this group, I just don't think there's enough in there to warrant that. That said, I do think they were underperforming, but I mean, Clement was done. I just couldn't see any way where it was going to work for Clement anymore. He'd lost the fan base. If Queen's Park hadn't happened, he might still be there, but Queen's Park did happen, so they had to get someone in. I mean, an interim, it's either someone who's already kicking about the club, or someone that's out of a job, and in this case, they went for Barry Ferguson, who was obviously out of a job. I was listening to his presser today. I think he's already been told that the job's not his. You know what I mean? I think the new director of football has had that conversation. When he was talking about the conversation, the first meeting he'd had with him, I kind of read between the lines a wee bit and thought, I'm taking that he's already been told the folk that are coming in, because that seems to be a done deal. I know we'll go on and talk about that later in the show, but the takeover appears to be a done deal. I'm taking it that Ferguson's been told that this is there's no chance of him getting the job permanently. So in terms of his legacy, I mean, I'd like to see him get another victory against them. I thought they played really well that day at Celtic Park. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, we let them back into it at one stage, but I definitely think we deserve to win it that day. So yeah, I would love to see it. I mean, I suppose if you want to look at a legacy for Ferguson over the 3 months that he was here, if it was to win on Sunday, he could say that he was undefeated against them. He obviously had that really good night in Istanbul. Sorry, that was a really good performance, and we should have came home with a 4 or 5-1 victory that night. And some of the other games that I've actually quite enjoyed, like the Dundee game and the Kilmarnock game, because they were so up and down, they were so in last minute winners and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, like games like last week are just atrocious. You know what I mean? And some of the home games have been atrocious. So yeah, if he gets a victory on Sunday, he can always say that he faced them twice and he beat them twice. So yeah, I'd imagine it.
And that's really my point. I mean, it's interesting what you said there. Well. Sorry, Colin. It's interesting what you said there. You think he's been told. No. I have to say, I hope he's been told. I mean, surely he isn't being considered for the permanent job. He had a chance. Had he performed miracles, then he would have been in the running, because, like you say, I think a decent section of the support, wanted him to succeed. Would have given him the benefit of the doubt, and then that does carry some weight, even with people we don't know. They can't be blind to that. So had Ferguson come in and Rangers had gone on a run, then who knows? But we haven't, and at times we've played appallingly. The job is not. I'd be astonished if the job is his. So like you, if he hasn't been told outright, then I think he's been told in some other way. I think he is. Yeah. And as such, that's why I think this is his legacy. This is the game. If we get beaten Sunday, that will be a horrible game. With them in the ground, they're already going to be giving it, all the stuff about being champions. There's all of that. There's a fair bit of doom and gloom about the side just now. Wouldn't take much, I don't think, for the support to be, less than supportive. Yeah. shall we say? So, whereas they go out and put in a performance and get a result, Ferguson can at least go away and as you say, his legacy is, well, I won at Parkhead and I won at Ibrox, which is more than most of his successors have managed in the last few years. So, and I think that would be quite a nice legacy. Ferguson shouldn't get the job. I don't want Ferguson to get the job, but that would be a nice legacy. He's come in. It's not his fault he got given the job. I don't blame him for taking it. I think that would be quite a nice thing for him to be able to say. Plus, saves a bit of face.
Yeah. I was kind of stuck with a rock and a hard place with Ferguson because I wanted them to do well, but not so well
that he got the job.
He got the job permanently. You know what I mean? It was that kind of because at the very start, I was in the conversations I was having with people, after games in the pub and all the rest of it. I was like, "There's no way he's getting the job. There's no danger he's getting the pub." And somebody's like, "Well, if he wins all his games," I'm like, "Oh, you know what I mean?" So, yeah, but there's just I just cannot see it. You know what I mean? There's absolutely no danger.
No, there's no chance. I remember when Souness left, and there was a kind of week between Souness leaving and Walter Smith being appointed, and now it looks like the most obvious, sensible decision that anybody could make. But at the time, Walter Smith had never managed. He'd never been a manager in his own right, other than a very short spell before Souness joined, where he was asked to take the team for the last few games of the season. He'd never been a manager. It wasn't, and it nearly went wrong. I remember at Fir Park and us losing at Fir Park, and suddenly we're having to beat Aberdeen, who were on a roll at a time when Aberdeen had a decent team, and we were looking at having to beat them at Ibrox to win the league. And if we hadn't won that game, who knows? History may have gone very differently.
There's no 9 in a row.
So
I remember being linked with Beckenbauer and Dalglish for the Rangers job
at that time
when Souness left, and I can remember
George Graham. I remember George Graham as well, who at that time had
and there was
stellar record at Arsenal.
And there was real disappointment, not disappointment, but there was palpable sort of. It was anticlimactic when Walter Smith got given the job.
Yeah.
I can remember a lot of supporters being really disappointed that he got the job.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And I was a bit Walter Smith. You know what I mean, but as you say, he proved everybody wrong. And
well, absolutely. And as I said, it'll seem daft to some people that we're even saying this, but it's true. And I think it's the point I'm making about Ferguson, that he could have made the job his. I don't think he has. I hope he hasn't. But he did. He could have. It could have gone differently, and who knows. Whereas I think if he wins on Sunday, I think that a decent legacy for him to leave behind. I think he would always be looked at with affection. Then for his time, it didn't work out, but like you say, he's not solely to blame for that. Talking about the people who are to blame, team news. Balogun trained but there's a question mark. I think he's wearing one of these masks. Obviously, Sterling and Ridvan are both out for the season, so we're a bit weak at the back. How do you see us lining up, particularly in defence? We're going to stick with the 5 at the back, do you think? Is he going to go back to a back 4? What's the plan?
I mean, I think going with the 3 centre halves could be risky on Sunday because we're so short in centre halves. If one gets injured during the game, then you're struggling. So I'm just wondering if he might go back to a back 4 on Sunday, and that gives us an option on the bench at centre half, if you know what I mean, rather than having every single available centre half out on the pitch. So I have to wait and see. And I've got to be honest with you, I'm not convinced. I mean, it worked to start with. It worked in 1 or 2 of the games. Obviously, the game at Celtic Park, the game in Istanbul, as we talked about. That shape, that sort of 3 centre halves, and Jeffy and Tav sort of almost being wing backs, I suppose. It worked initially, but I mean, it's just it's not worked at all recently, and so I don't know. I think personnel that's available might force a change on Sunday, but I also think I would like to hope they're sitting down chatting about, actually, is this working anymore? We maybe need to freshen things up a wee bit and try something a bit different, because I mean that game last week was was terrible. So yeah, we'll see what comes out. But I just think the who's available might dictate the formation in terms of how many we go with, whether we go with a back four or three centre halves.
I'm going to not say his name right. I've only had a season to
see. I was thinking about that. I was thinking about this before we started.
Does he come into the?
Well, see,
reckoning?
we grew up with Mikhail Lachenko, and obviously we were younger then, and we coped with that name. And now somebody like Casemiro, I was getting the sweats thinking about.
I think Casemiro is a dangerous Australian bird. I think we're both completely mispronouncing his name there. But that lad, the Dutch lad, he got a half midweek there, so. I don't know if he got a half because he's not fit to play a full match, or if he got a half because they wanted to see him get a run out to see if he is fit. Because he looked half decent when I saw him.
Well, I was reading earlier on this week that apparently the initial plan at the beginning of the season was Suter and him as the main centre half pairing, and obviously injury sort of put paid to that. Obviously, he played through the week. He scored and played really well by all accounts. I didn't see the game, so. He maybe comes in. Whether he can last 90 minutes, so that's the thing. I mean, it was quite a serious injury he came back from. It was his knee, wasn't it? It was quite a bad injury he came back from.
To be honest, I hadn't expected him back. I didn't think we were going to see him again. So I hadn't actually been following his recuperation and what stage he was at. I got surprised when I saw his name in the Glasgow Cup team.
Yeah, it was you that you sent the message over through the week saying he'd been selected and scored, and I was like, I thought he was back at Feyenoord. I had no idea he was back in the building again. Apparently we've got an option to buy, but because of his injury, I don't think the club are overly keen to take that option up. But that
surprises me. I thought that would have fitted the profile perfectly for the type of player we buy. And he didn't have an injury before we give him an injury, then you would think we would buy him. We'd do a Cortez on him.
Yeah. It's maybe we've learned a lesson. I don't know, but I mean, maybe there's discussions going on behind the scene for him to come over for another loan with a further option to buy. I don't know, but apparently the club are not looking to activate that option this summer. So maybe next time the club is coming to an end.
You have better inside information than I do, Colin, and I think we've established.
I just read the Rangers review, John. That's.
And they have better inside information than I do. Bailey Rice has come back into the team recently. He played last week. Does he keep his place, do you think, at the weekend?
If you're ever going to give a boy a chance in an Old Firm game,
those gaps you leave, they're going to stop doing it.
Something that
you're freezing.
No, I think it is. I'm getting a message up here saying I've got low bandwidth, so I think it's cutting out constantly. So, I've had real issues with my Wi-Fi of late. I think, if you're going to give a young boy an opportunity in a game like this, well, Sunday when there's nothing really at stake is the time to do it. The aforementioned Walter Smith. He used to do that quite regularly. Quite frequently, there would be just a random selection in the team. You know what I mean? In an Old Firm game, some boy you'd never heard of before, he would just chuck them in to see what they're all about. You know what I mean? If you want to see if they've got what it takes, because when I was younger, when a teenager and early 20s, I used to just think it was all about ability football. It was all about what you could do with the ball. It was all about the technical ability that you had. It's not. The mentality is so much more about it. Really, I wouldn't say average players, but a lot of people have made better careers than what they were given in terms of their technical ability, because their mentality, the fact that they just wanted to win and all that kind of stuff. It's a huge part of the game, and as the old saying goes, sport reveals character, all that kind of stuff. So you have to just chuck these boys in sometime and see if they've got what it takes. And if there's nothing really at stake on Sunday, then that's probably the best time to give the boys a chance.
This season under Clement, Colin, this season under Clement and under Ferguson, we've tended to play three central midfielders. You assume Diomande and Raskin will start. If fit, they'll start. Yeah. And it's then who's the third one. And I haven't been impressed with Barron second half of the season, I think Barnes has been poor.
No, he's fell off a cliff.
I really have. I've not been impressed with him since, I don't know, since the autumn. Rice, I've still not seen it from him yet. I've still to say, now I see what they're all talking about. But like you say, sometimes he gets a game, and he didn't cover himself in glory last weekend, but then none of them did. So he certainly didn't do enough last weekend to say, he's definitely got a place in the team. But it wouldn't be a big surprise if he did come in. And up front, does Dessers remain our central striker? Does Ingemann get back in that position? I know you're a Dessers fan. What do you think?
Well, one thing I do think, last week, again, was another example of, Dessers getting stick because he missed 2 or 3 chances. But in the same game, I didn't see, Ingemann get any chances, really. He struggled again last week.
He's been played out of position. He isn't. We're not getting the best out of Ingemann just now. It's frustrating.
But again, it's one of those games where you think is now. I wouldn't actually mind seeing Cortez getting a start on Sunday as well. Just to see what these guys have got. And so it would maybe be the game to start Ingemann and maybe bring Dessers on in the sort of last 20 minutes or whatever, and if we're needing a goal. I wouldn't be against seeing Ingemann starting at all, because I wouldn't say Dessers has necessarily played himself. Well, obviously he scored last week. I wouldn't say he's played himself out of the team, but he's, the misses have increased of late, so maybe it's just an opportunity to take him out.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he doesn't start up front. I'll be honest. I think he'll start. I think Ferguson likes him. I think I'm not sure he likes Ingemann as much.
So I've got my suspicions that he's not keen on Ingemann at all.
Yeah, so we'll see. Raskin won a rather low-key Player of the Year award through the week. He had a big match last time against Celtic. I think he was our best player in that game. I think he was the best midfielder on the park in that game. Is he our most influential player just now? Has he become the guy that if he's ticking, then we've got a decent chance? Do you feel that's what Raskin is now?
Yeah, and it's strange because he couldn't buy a game at the start of the season, and I genuinely think, if Rangers had started the season a bit better, he might not have forced his way in. It felt like he was totally out of the cold. I remember Colin. I think
he was struggling with injury a wee bit when he first came back. He said he was overweight and things. I don't think he was quite right physically when he first came back.
Well, I remember Clement put him in to start with when Clement got the job, and then he just sort of phased him out, and it just felt like his Rangers career was dwindling away a wee bit. But he certainly, I would say from sort of October, November time, he's come in and sort of made it his own, and it always seems to be the case, because of where he is in his contract. We've got a decision to make in the summer. If he's not prepared to sign an extension, then I think we need to be looking at moving him on, to be perfectly honest with you, because we don't want that scenario of him, another one, walking out the door for nothing. So it looks like, unless he signs an extension, it looks like he's just found his feet just at the point where we need to actually be looking to move him on. But I don't think anyone could disagree that he's been our Player of the Year. Loads of people will shoot me down for this. I would have Dessers up there just because of the
absolutely.
The goals that he scores.
And he's a player. Dessers the kind of player. I know we've talked about Dessers many times, but he is the kind of player. He doesn't hide. He frustrates you. He's not. His chances to goals ratio, it drives you up the wall. There are times I think if he isn't scoring, he's doing nothing. There's times his hold-up play I feel hasn't been strong enough, but consistently, he does score goals. And this season, to be fair to him, he has scored some important goals. He has. Yeah, he's definitely. It's probably as much a compliment to him, but it's also probably a reflection on his teammates that we do view Dessers as one of the players who's had a better season. Interesting that Ingemann, I see, is up for Young Player of the Year for the whole league. I don't know if that says what that says about the state of young players in the Scottish League, but I see he's up for Young Player because he had a spell he just
I
fell
was about to
in
say
the
that.
winter when
Just before Christmas.
he just
I would
was,
say
was looking like somebody's magical, and that's he's suffered since Clement left. He was a player who was coming through, and then the change hasn't suited him for whatever reason. The change hasn't suited him. I don't know if that's. I'm not blaming Ferguson for that. I'm just making the point that since that change has come in, Egerman hasn't actually played the type of football he was playing.
Yeah.
Hey ho. Okay. Before we leave Sunday, I thought we'd maybe try and brighten the mood a little bit. The bookies are not giving good odds just now on a Celtic victory. They're giving very good odds on a Rangers victory. It's surprising just how bad they are. I wanted to just tap into that encyclopedic mind of yours, Colin, and what's your favourite memory of playing Celtic at Ibrox? You've seen us play at Celtic at Ibrox a few times. What's your favourite memory?
Oh God. I mean, my first Old Firm game was a good. It was 4 each game. That was a good game. That was a really excellent game.
Yeah.
Probably the one I'm going to go with Johnson's the last minute winner.
Mm-hmm.
Johnson when he scored that last minute. That was my seat at that time. That was before they filled the corners in at Ibrox, and I had the very last seat in the front row before the Broomloan Road end, so I was really close to the Celtic fans. And when Johnson scored that goal, honestly, I've never seen the ground empty so quickly in my life. I turned around and that Broomloan Road stand was empty.
I was in the Old East enclosure at that game, and after the game, I think it was my cousin. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think I had an older cousin that we'd gone with, and his car broke down on the M8, and we ended up on the hard shoulder of the M8 just before the Kingston Bridge, sitting there, and it was fine until all the Celtic buses started coming past us because they'd obviously held them back, and we were sitting there with these big grins, and we couldn't have cared less. The car could be getting written off. Who cared? What a moment it was. And we're sitting there and it's crawling past us, and we're just sitting there with big grins on our faces, and they know. They could tell by looking at us where we'd been supported. We weren't wearing scarves. We'd left them in the car. We were just sitting there, and honestly, there was times I thought, they're coming off that bus after us. Where do you go? Where do we go?
You're on the hard shoulder.
Like you, when I was asking you this question, I was thinking myself, and there's been a few great ones. But actually, I think the one my favourite was also a draw. It was a 2 each game when Woods and Butcher get sent off, and Roberts ended up in goal.
Yeah.
Ironically, I think I don't remember a game quite like that one, where we were down to 9 men. One of our centre halves is in goals. Bear in mind, it's the days you use yourselves. We only had 2 subs. One of our centre halves is in goal. The other centre half's been sent off. I mean, Derek Ferguson was playing centre half, and on pretty much on his own. It was ridiculous, and we were 2-0 down. To a good Celtic team. We were 2-0 down, and to get that back, and when Goff scored, it wasn't the last minute, but it was late on. I don't remember Ibrox quite as joyous. It was, it was just that. It just felt like a victory, even though it wasn't a victory. We'd drawn at home, but it felt like a victory because of what happened. And obviously the aftermath of it and everything. But that was a brilliant game. It was a brilliant game to be at.
I wasn't at that game.
Yeah, well, that was great. You missed yourself that game, mate. That was a great game. That was a great 2-each draw.
My abiding memory is see when Goff scores, the mic gets blown out.
Is that
the
right?
Mic
I mean,
the crowd just
the noise,
just
the noise when that went in,
it completely goes. So
yeah.
the mic's blown, but the noise of the sort of the support reacting to it. You know what I mean? I think it was the last minute, John. I think it was pretty much.
It wasn't quite the
Roberts.
last minute because after the goal, the ball gets put back to Roberts and he famously does this. You know, so it wasn't quite the last minute, but it was towards the end. There was a moment Billy Stark
hit the bar,
except he didn't score. He hit the bar, but he'd done the header. It looked like it was in, and he was away. You know, he turned round. He was off running, and it hit the bar. It goes back out, and I think Roberts gets it. And he hasn't realised until everyone goes, 40,000 people. Yeah, mister. Yeah. Just these daft things you remember. Right, listen, we'll leave Sunday. So a couple of quick things before we wrap it up for the night. We're linked in the press this week with Josh Mulligan of Dundee, who I have to say his career has largely passed me by until this week. Nobody's confirming or denying. The players saying nothing, which is usually a sign that there's some truth in it. You know, these things I don't think. I think there's some truth in this. I'm not expecting you to give me chapter and verse on it, but is he the kind of signing that we should be making? Obviously we've signed Lyle Cameron from Dundee. Is two young boys from Dundee. Is that the kind of signings Rangers should be making at this stage? Is this surprising you?
Well, I mean, I think we've kind of had this conversation before, John, around signing young guys, and I'm all for it, especially Scottish guys. You know what I mean? I do think I get the feeling. Again, I read this a while back. I think it was who was the boy at the Athletic that wrote for Rangers? What was his name? Was it Jordan Campbell? I'm sure he wrote in the Athletic once that Rangers as a club were avoiding the Scottish market, and I think a lot of it was historical around 2012, and things were still sort of settling down from that. Yeah, obviously there was obviously still a bit of friction between us and other clubs, and I think the feeling was we didn't want to impart our cash to some of these clubs. So it did feel for a while that we just completely ignored that market completely. You know what I mean? So always good to see Scottish players getting into the team, but as I've said before, we need a spine. The team lacks leadership in my opinion. There's just not enough leaders in that team. I think it's fine having the young boys that we're signing in that team, but you have to have a core of at least 4 or 5 that are leaders, experienced, and have been over the ground before. When you look at, I suppose the best example of it is the class of '92 at Man United. I mean, everybody thought Ferguson was off his nut when he got rid of Kanchelskis and Hughes and Paul Ince and and brought all these young kids in. You know what I mean? But he still had Cantona. Ryan Giggs was already in it. I think Ryan Giggs was only 20. Steve Bruce
played 500 games or something by the time he was 20. Yeah.
Roy Keane. You know what I mean? He still had the core of a title-winning team there. He was just bringing in 3 or 4 young boys. So, I just always feel that every Rangers team, every successful Rangers team that I've watched has always had that spine. That core group of players who are robust, who are there week in, week out. They're very rarely injured. They're experienced. They're winners.
Yeah.
And you get the fringe players round about them, the guys that they'll play 5-6 games in, they're out for 3-4 games, and then they're back in again. Yeah. But you've got that core group of players that are there week in, week out, that are sort of setting the tempo, setting the tone in the dressing room, and leading you to titles and cups and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I'm all for signing these young boys. You know what I mean? I'm all for bringing, as I said earlier, especially Scottish boys, but we need that core. We need that spine in that team, because I think the players that we've signed and over the last year or so, we've just went too far the other way. You know what I mean? We've looked naive. I think a perfect example was Enciala last week, who has looked good. I thought he played well in Bilbao. But I mean, that clearance last week for St Mirren's first goal is just so bad. It's again that lack of experience, naivety. a young guy just making a really, really bad mistake in a team that's really underperforming.
Yeah, it's forgotten about if we win the game 4-1. That's the point.
That's what I mean.
It's forgotten about if we win the game 4-1.
Yeah. If you've got a good enough core in that team that gets you over the line, the boy learns.
Aye.
And he realises, this is what I can't do in the future, and it's forgotten about. But as you say, if it's the other way about, it's a team that's struggling. The spotlight goes on you, and all of a sudden you maybe become a bit nervous about your next clearance and all the rest of it. So it's a kind of repetitive thing. So yeah, as I said, all for bringing these boys in, but we also need players in there that know how to get the job done and get us over the line. Last
point tonight. Andrew Kavanagh and I don't know how you say this guy's name properly. Parag Marathi. I've apologised for murdering the pronunciation of that man's name. The people from the 49ers.
Yeah, because you're trespass, Sean.
Yeah. I think there's more than one reason why I'm not getting one of them. So they visited Ibrox very publicly through the week. They were basically being shown off. That's what it looked like to me through the week, which, I think you and I agree on this. That suggests that people are fairly confident that this deal is going to be done. I'm old enough to remember Michael Knighton being presented on the pitch at Manchester United, and turned out to have a penny to his name. Didn't he keep it up? And then have a penny to his name. So it's not done till it's done. But you have to assume that the people who know about these things reckon that this is a done deal. Listen, this is a simple question, and I'm sure you're about to answer it in 2 minutes. Do you welcome our new owners? How are you feeling about this?
Cautiously optimistic. It's, I think. I don't want to sound too critical of the current ownership. Because it was them that came in and got us kind of out of the situation we were in with, the Easdales and Mike Ashley and all that kind of stuff. And the club really was in a really, really bad way. And they've got us over the line in terms of, stopped the 10 in a row. They got us back into the top tier, won the championship again, got us to a European final. So there has been a lot of positives, and there is some stuff you see, like the new Emerson House. I know a lot of the fans mock it and all the rest of it, but stuff like that helps. It helps the match day revenue. It helps attract families to the game. If they know there's somewhere to go before the game and after the game, or you can take your kids and all that kind of stuff. This stuff is positive steps in terms of taking the club forward. But I would actually say Seville seems to me like the turning point. It felt at the time that Seville was this should take us
forward. The
springboard, but it just seems to have went completely the other way, and some really chronic bad decision making. I think Michael Beale's a bad appointment. I think getting rid of a sporting director and a director of football, whatever you want to call it, going away from that model was a bad decision. I think Bisgrove was a bad decision, and it just felt like every single decision we've sort of made since Seville, or every sort of major decision, we've got more wrong than we've got right, and I think that's why we find ourselves where we find ourselves. And
so that doesn't quite answer the question of how you're feeling about these new people.
Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is it feels like it's time for a change, but I don't quite buy into all the stuff I'm seeing on Twitter, like people with American flags and their profile pic and all that kind of stuff. I think as a fan base, us more than any other fan base should be wary of any new owner that's coming into the club.
Yeah.
They need to prove to us that they have the club's best interests at heart, have our best interests at heart. When you look at some of the scenarios in the Premier League, the American ownership, I don't want to get into too much detail, but the guy that owned Arsenal, what he done with the shares was chronic. He just basically worked himself into a position where fans who had shares in their family for years and years and years literally had to sell to him. It was just terrible what he done, and so that he could sort of get full control of the club. You look at the Glazers and Man United. Man United are a shell of a club. I know they're on the brink of reaching another European final, but if it wasn't for those three clubs at the bottom of the Premiership, having such a horrific season. Southampton and I can't remember the other two, but
Leicester and
I think Spurs and Man United would be
they'd be fighting relegation.
You know what I mean? Man United definitely. So they're a shell of a club, and it kind of felt like that even towards the end of Ferguson's time at the club. I mean, the Glazers were there at that time. It felt like he kicked the last few titles at them. It felt like
sheer will.
Things were starting to go right. Yeah. They weren't the sort of powerhouse that they were before. Obviously, City had arrived and all the rest of it. So we definitely have to be wary. But
I don't think we can. I think just because some American owners haven't been very impressive, I don't think we can see all of. We can't see that, but every American owner. But I am like you. I am surprised at how enthusiastic some of our support are about this, for me, what is a giant leap into the total unknown. I have no idea why these people want Rangers. I don't know what it is they think they can get from us. The only reason they can be buying us is for money. That's the only reason. The only reason they can buy us is because they see a way of making money. Because they're not buying us because they're supporters. And they're not buying us because they need to lift their profile. David Murray wanted to own Rangers because it lifted his profile. It was an ego boost. Yeah. It got him publicity, and he liked that. And that's why he wanted to own Rangers. Forget the name. Who's the guy that named it? Was the Russian guy that owned Chelsea? What's his name? Completely forgotten his name. Abramovich. Abramovich bought Chelsea because he needed to raise his profile so that it was really difficult to extradite him.
KGB didn't shoot him.
Basically, So there are people who buy football clubs, and that's happened a lot. And that's happened quite a lot in England. It's happened in the guy Bernard Tapie did it with Marseille famously. It was about, he wanted to raise his profile, he wanted to get involved in politics. Some people buy football clubs for ego. There's an ego reason for them owning a football club. I don't get the impression that's what it is with these guys. So it's got to be about making money. And I still would love someone to explain to me how you make money out of a team in Scotland. I don't see how that happens. And that concerns me. I have to say I am not, so you said, cautiously optimistic. I don't think I'm in that. I don't think I'm in that. I am pessimistic about what's going on. And like you, I understand the failings of the current board and the mistakes that have been made, and mistakes have been made. But they leave us in a better place than they found us, which I think a lot of people are overlooking. They have put their own money and their own time into the club, and it hasn't worked as well as we would have liked it to work, but it has worked at times. Some things they've definitely got wrong. Some appointments they got wrong. Some key appointments they got wrong. But everybody gets some appointments wrong. I know there's nothing we can do about it. I don't want to be writing these guys off, but I am nervous about it.
Yeah, there's one way I think they could make money for them club, and it's kind of, again, American ownership. It's apparently this is what FSG are doing at Liverpool. It's through increasing the value of the club. So you go in, you invest in it, you get it back on its feet, increase the value of it, and then sell it. So
who are you selling it to?
Well, this is the thing. Who
wants to own Scottish football clubs? But if it's not supporters, who wants to own Scottish football clubs? That's what worries me here. That's what. I could understand if we were, in the English Championship, and get us into the Premier League, and you're sitting at. That Leeds, I read a thing, Leeds will be looking at a turnover next year of about £250 million just for being in the league. And that could go up to about 500 million if they can stay in it for another season. It's phenomenal money that we can't, we would need to win the Champions League 3 years in a row to get even close to that. I don't know. Anyway, let's worry about Sunday. And
maybe they're going to get. Maybe they're going to get us into the Champions League, John, and we'll win it 3 years in a row.
Well, Colin, I think on that note, we will end the programme tonight. with Colin's prediction
okay.
for next season and the next 3 seasons after that. Listen, Colin, it's always a pleasure. It's good to see you. It's good to talk to you this weekend. And let's hope we're still smiling on Sunday. Wherever we'll be. There's no dead rubbers. That's the thing to remember. And thanks for those of you who've hung around and listened to us rambling on tonight. Just to remind you that the podcast is available on Acast, iTunes, YouTube, Castbox, Stitcher, and Spotify. There will be a pod on Sunday night, and I believe it is Rob and Stuart who'll be on Sunday night, so that should be a good show. Lastly, just to remind you, if you enjoy the podcast, please do go to social media or click and follow us.